Now, the South African Reserve Bank Monetary Policy Committee decided to hold rates steady. That was no surprise, but lots of signals about what might happen at the next meeting or the one after. Joining me to talk about this and other economic issues is Etienne le Roux, who is Rand Merchant Bank's chief economist. Hi, Etienne. Just before we get onto the MPC, just following on from the previous discussion, when Marcel there was talking about government people cutting their travel, I was thinking, it's probably at the upper end of his resorts and hotels as well. Yeah, but it's interesting that they've seen that.
I thought that was quite an interesting observation. You can call it austerity light. A very good sign at a micro level that the government is putting in an effort to cut waste and fat out of the system. And as a tax-paying citizen, we must hope that the government and the finance minister does more of that. Otherwise, our tax burden is simply going to go up, because what is not debatable is the fact that the finance minister needs to reduce the budget deficit to stabilize the government debt to GDP ratio. And if he doesn't better control spending and we can't borrow more, then you have to raise the tax burden.
And they don't want to kill
limited option there.
The golden goose on that side.
Exactly.
What about the MPC today? And I heard the report that said, I don't know how often they've done this before, where they actually say the vote.
Yes.
Tito Mboweni always used to say, no, it's a consensus decision. 4-2 in favour of keeping steady. That's not far from a divided committee.
100% right. And I can understand why they kept rates unchanged today. Inflation 4.5%, still relatively low. We know the economy is weak. But it is very clear that the central bank is worried about inflation 12, 18 months from now. As it is, the inflation forecast shows a peak of 6.8% in the first quarter. That's very close to 7%. And then an average inflation rate of 6.1%. And that, very importantly, incorporates only a 13% increase in Eskom tariffs. So obviously it will get even worse than that if Eskom gets what they are actually asking for.
Well, they're going to have to, I think, in the end, get more money than they're asking for. The government wage bill, a lot of some surprise actually about the 7%. I mean, I personally expected it to, as usual, go above that. However, there's some hidden costs there. Medical allowances, that's not part of the 7%, so it's actually a bit high, isn't it?
So it's probably closer to 7.5%, everything all in. Still above inflation. The central bank, the governor particularly, was concerning about wage inflation, just generally speaking. I don't think, a CEO will gladly give an employee a salary increase of 8 or 9%, but you have to up your productivity. And it is unit labour cost, growth in unit labour cost that matters.
But all our sectors are below par in productivity.
Absolutely, and that's where the issue is. So you have wage inflation that is too high, and it incorporates, or not incorporates, but it means that there's an inherent inflation risk in that, together with Eskom, an important inflation risk, and then the rand as well. And the governor is very worried here. Clearly, they've done the research, and it's quite clear that they're very worried. If history is any guide, the governor tells us that if the Fed hikes, the rand will come under pressure, bond yields will probably spike, and if the currency is weak and everything else goes wrong with Eskom and on the wage front, we have a serious problem. Then you're stuck. And as a central bank that targets inflation, well, you only have one tool, and that's to tighten policy into high grades. Talking
of the rand, the other thing they're thinking about at the moment is this alleged manipulation by some of the very big banks. Got your eye on that?
Well, John, my colleague, is our FX strategist, so he follows that very closely. Once again, the governor was explicit. It was something that they did not discuss at the MPC meeting today, probably because it's still very early days.
Of course, it's a competition commission thing, which is unusual.
Absolutely.
I presume they would have told the governor about it.
No, you never know. I'm not so sure. The FX market is obviously a very complicated market, and an investigation like this will not be resolved in a space of a couple of weeks. It will take a very long time. The unfortunate reality is that it adds a layer of uncertainty at a time when there are a lot of other stuff to worry about as it is when you think about the exchange rate. We spoke about the Fed and there are a lot of other stuff happening in the global economy that certainly keeps FX traders, occupied.
Well, there's certainly something that the Competition Commission's got hold of from a whistleblower or someone in the sector. Stephen Kossoff of Investec said earlier in the interview we had with him, they were taken completely by surprise. And of course, they're all saying they'll cooperate, but they don't know what the nature of these allegations is yet. But as you say, more uncertainty.
Yes, we're speculating about this. Yeah.
Bigger picture, Etienne, what do you wake up in the morning at the moment, and what's the first number that you're looking at?
Well, the currency is the key one. Very important in a monetary policy setting. It is important because we import a lot of goods and it tends to be inflationary. What is interesting at the central bank, the governor highlighted the fact that the pass-through effect from currency weakness into inflation seemed to have come down quite considerably, which obviously is a reflection of the weak economy. It's much tougher for corporates to increase selling prices when the economy is weak, despite the fact that the rand is under pressure. So that was just an interesting aside. So the currency is always very important. On a daily basis, you watch the stock market to get an idea of sentiment and how that's changing. On a monthly basis, you watch inflation, obviously, and then any kind of real economic indicator. There are many of them that's released on a monthly basis, and you need all of that information to formulate a view on the next GDP quarterly data.
We're certainly not short of stuff to help the analysis, but people like you have to actually put it into a digestible form. That is Rand Merchant Bank Chief Economist Etienne le Roux. Thanks, Etienne, for joining us this evening.